Gunshots echoed across the dry grassland. The sun had just sunk behind the Red Rock Mountains when Mason Reed pulled the trigger on his Colt single-action army, the .45 caliber bullet tearing through the air. Seth Dawson, the man who'd led the raid on his family's ranch, fell backward, his eyes staring blankly at the Arizona sky. "That was for Sarah and Hannah," Mason growled, watching as Dawson clutched at the bloody hole in his chest. "You'll never find peace," Dawson wheezed, blood bubbling at his lips. "That's the last one," Mason said quietly, blowing smoke from the barrel. "Sarah and Hannah can finally rest in peace." It was 1877, and Mason Reed had hunted down all 7 outlaws who had massacred his wife and daughter during the raid on his ranch 5 years prior. Now, with his mission complete, Mason was left alone, with nothing but his gun, his horse, and his memories. 1882 Lone Rock Ranch, Arizona Territory. The rhythmic clanging of metal on metal echoed through the night. Mason Reed, 48, hammered at a glowing piece of iron, sweat glistening on his weathered face despite the cool desert night. The forge's orange glow cast long shadows across the ranch yard, illuminating a face lined with years of hardship and loss. Mason worked the iron when sleep wouldn't come, which was most nights. The physical labor drove away the nightmares, the faces of the dead, the memories of what he'd lost. 15 years as an Army scout and 5 as a bounty hunter had left their mark on his body, a network of scars that told stories he preferred to forget. He dunked the shaped metal into a water barrel, steam hissing into the night air. Something made him pause, a sound, out of place in the rhythm of the desert night. Mason set down his tools and reached for the Colt that never left his side. He moved with a silent grace that belied his age, slipping into the shadows with practiced ease. At 48, he remained as dangerous as he'd been at 30, perhaps more so, experience having refined his lethal skills. The sound came again, a faint thud by the front gate. Mason circled wide, approaching from an angle that kept him in darkness. Through the moonlight, he could make out a figure collapsed in the dirt. His first thought was ambush. It wouldn't be the first time someone had tried to lure him out with a trick. Moving closer, he saw it was a woman, face down, blood soaking her side. Beside her lay a small, intricately carved wooden box and a leather pouch. Mason kept his distance, scanning the horizon for signs of company. The empty desert stared back. He approached cautiously, rifle ready. Kneeling beside her, he turned the woman over gently. She was young, maybe 25, with striking features, high cheekbones and copper skin that spoke of mixed Apache and Mexican heritage. On her arm, partially visible beneath her torn sleeve, was a tattoo, the mark of an Apache clan that Mason recognized all too well. The same clan that had raided alongside the outlaws who killed his family. The woman's eyes fluttered open, dark and filled with pain. "They killed my husband," she whispered, her accent a blend of Spanish and Apache. "They're coming." From the distance came the sound of hoofbeats, slow but steady. "Who's coming?" Mason asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Men who want what isn't theirs," she managed, clutching at his arm with surprising strength. "Please." Mason had a choice to make, and quickly. This woman wore the marks of his enemies, yet she was defenseless, wounded. For a brief moment, an image flashed in his mind. Sarah, his wife, pleading for mercy from raiders who showed none. "What's your name?" he asked abruptly. Maria Diaz." Mason made his decision. "This ain't your night to die, Maria Diaz," he muttered, lifting her with ease. The wooden box and leather pouch he tucked under his arm. Whatever they were, they seemed important enough for her to hold on to while fleeing for her life. Inside his cabin, he laid her on a bench near the hearth. The fire's glow revealed the extent of her injuries. A bullet had grazed her side, tearing through flesh but missing vital organs. She had other bruises and cuts, evidence of a beating. Mason worked efficiently, cleaning and bandaging the wound with a practiced hand. As he cut away the fabric around her wound, she stirred, her face contorting in pain. Easy, he said quietly. It hurts, I know. It'll be over quick. Light, she gasped. Please, I hurt. I know, he replied, continuing his work. I'll be quick. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder. Mason finished the bandaging, checked her other injuries, then moved to the window. 3 riders approaching, torches illuminating hard faces in the darkness. Mason grabbed his Winchester model 1873, checked the chamber, and positioned himself near the door. Maria was unconscious again, her breathing shallow but steady. The riders reined in at the gate. The leader, a tall man with a broken nose and a face like weathered leather, dismounted. The moonlight glinted off a silver star pinned to his vest. Not a lawman's badge, but a poor imitation meant to intimidate simple folk. Evening, the man called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Name's Riker. Looking for a woman passed through here. Pretty thing, probably wounded. Mason stepped onto the porch, keeping his rifle visible but not aimed. Nobody here but me, he called back. Riker grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Funny thing, though. We're following a blood trail that leads right to your door, mister. Reed. Mason Reed. And this is my land you're standing on. Recognition flickered in Riker's eyes. Reed, I heard of you. Army scout, bounty hunter. They called you the Ghost during the Comanche campaigns. That was a long time ago. Maybe? Riker spat tobacco juice into the dirt, but I still need to see that woman. Like I said, nobody here but me. Riker's eyes narrowed, taking in the blood on the ground, the defensive posture. Look, Reed, we don't want trouble. That woman took something doesn't belong to her. Something valuable. Her husband owed us. Can't help you, Mason said flatly, thumb resting on the hammer of his Winchester. Riker exchanged glances with his companions, weighing their odds. Mason's reputation preceded him, and the calm way he held that Winchester spoke volumes about a man who'd faced death too many times to fear it. We'll be back at first light, Riker finally said. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, old man. I'm not the one making things hard, Mason replied evenly. Now get off my land. The standoff lasted another tense moment before Riker signaled his men to back off. This ain't over, Reed. Mason watched them ride into the darkness, then returned inside. Maria was awake, struggling to sit up. Lay still, he ordered. You've lost blood. They'll come back, she said, her voice stronger now. They always do. Probably. Mason set his rifle down, but kept it within reach. Now, suppose you tell me what this is all about, and why you're wearing the mark of the Ghost Mountain Apache. Maria touched the tattoo on her arm. My mother was Apache, my father Mexican. I lived with my mother's people until I was 15, then with my father in Santa Fe. She paused. I married a white man, Robert Miller, 3 years ago. We had a small homestead near Silver Creek. And the men after you? Riker worked for us last spring, fixing our roof. Last night he came with 2 others. They said Robert had gold. When he denied it, her voice caught, beat him to death with a shovel. Right in front of me. Mason's expression remained impassive, but his eyes softened slightly. He knew all too well the pain of watching loved ones die. They tore apart our home looking for gold, Maria continued. I grabbed the box and ran. One of them shot me, but I kept going. Why this box? Mason asked, nodding toward the ornate wooden container. Instinct. It was important to Robert. He kept it hidden under a loose floorboard. Mason examined the box. Beautiful Apache craftsmanship, locked with a simple mechanism. The leather pouch was clearly Apache-made, adorned with beadwork. Do you have any idea what's inside? Maria shook her head. Robert never showed me. He said someday we'd have enough to buy land in Oregon. Mason was about to respond when a shot rang out, splintering the window frame. He moved with lightning speed, dousing the lamp and pulling Maria to the floor. Stay down, he whispered, grabbing his Winchester. Through the window, he could see shadows moving toward the barn. Riker and his men hadn't left after all. They were searching the property. They're looking for something specific, Mason muttered. What's in that barn they want so badly? I don't know, Maria said. Robert never. Another shot cut her off, followed by the sound of splintering wood. They were breaking into the barn. Mason slipped out the back door, moving silently through the shadows. He circled around, coming up behind the barn where Riker's men were too busy to notice. One stood guard outside while the others searched inside. Mason took aim and fired a warning shot over the guard's head. The man dove for cover, drawing his pistol. Next one won't miss, Mason called out. Tell Riker to show himself. Inside the barn, lantern light bobbed as the men scrambled. Riker emerged, pistol in hand, using the doorframe as cover. You're making a mistake, Reed, he shouted. This ain't your fight. You made it my fight when you shot at my house, Mason replied, moving to a new position. Now drop your guns and leave my property. Instead of complying, Riker fired wildly in Mason's direction. The bullet thudded into the wood beside him. Mason returned fire with deadly precision, his bullet catching Riker in the shoulder, spinning him around. The exchange of gunfire was brief but intense. Mason's experience showed each shot calculated, each movement purposeful. When it was over, one of Riker's men lay dead. Riker was wounded, and the third man was frantically trying to drag him onto a horse. This ain't over, Reed, Riker yelled as they retreated. We'll be back with more men. Mason waited until they were gone before investigating the barn. Inside, he found a section of flooring had been pried up. Beneath it was a small wooden chest. Maria appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame, her bandaged side showing fresh blood. You shouldn't be walking, Mason chided, but there was no heat in his words. What did they find? She asked, limping toward him. Mason lifted the chest from its hiding place and set it on a workbench. It wasn't locked. Inside, glinting in the lantern light, were gold coins, dozens of them. Well, I'll be damned, Mason breathed. Your husband wasn't lying after all. Maria stared in disbelief. He never told me. All this time. Looks like Spanish gold, Mason observed, examining a coin. Old, probably from a shipment lost during colonial times. This is what they killed him for, Maria whispered, tears forming in her eyes. This is what Robert died protecting. Mason closed the chest. And they'll be back for it, with more men next time. We need to. The sound of approaching horses interrupted him. These weren't being ridden hard like Riker's retreat. These came at an even, confident pace. Mason helped Maria back to the cabin, hiding the chest beneath the floorboards. By the time horses entered his yard, he was sitting casually on the porch, rifle across his lap, Maria hidden inside. 3 riders approached, a tall man in a dark coat and wide-brimmed hat, flanked by 2 deputies. The silver star on his chest was genuine. Sheriff Elliot Caldwell of Silver Creek, a man Mason knew by reputation but had little dealing with. Evening, Reed, Caldwell called, dismounting with the fluid grace of a man comfortable in the saddle. He was about 50, with cold eyes and a calculating face beneath a neat mustache. Sheriff, Mason acknowledged, bit late for social calls. Heard gunshots, Caldwell said, walking toward the porch. Everything all right out here? Just some horse thieves. Ran 'em off. Caldwell's eyes took in the blood on the ground, the bullet holes in the barn. Horse thieves, huh? Seem awful determined? Some are. The sheriff studied Mason's face, then glanced at the cabin. You alone out here, Reed? Always am. Caldwell nodded thoughtfully. Interesting coincidence. Got word tonight about a disturbance at the Miller place over by Silver Creek. Robert Miller beaten to death, his Apache wife missing. He paused. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Afraid not, Mason replied evenly. Don't get to town much these days. That so? Caldwell walked to the barn, examining the bullet holes. Mind if I look around? Without a warrant? Yeah, I mind. Caldwell turned, his hand resting casually near his gun. Now, Reed, I'm just trying to solve a murder, being neighborly. And I'm just protecting my privacy, being American. The tension between them was palpable. Finally, Caldwell shrugged. Have it your way, but I'll be back, with that warrant. As the sheriff mounted up, he added, "Folks in town are saying Miller found gold. Lots of it. You hear anything about that? You let me know." After they rode off, Mason went inside. Maria was sitting up, her face pale but determined. "The sheriff knew about Robert," she said. "How?" "News travels fast when it comes to murder. And gold." Mason poured them both whiskey, but he was here awful quick and asking specific questions. "You think he's involved?" Mason sipped his drink, considering. "I think we need to find out what's in that box of yours. And we need to leave before morning." Dawn was breaking when Mason finished prying open the wooden box. Inside was a deer-hide map covered in Apache symbols and an English letter from Maria's father, Carlos Diaz, whose Apache name translated to "one who walks with the wind." Maria read the letter aloud, her voice growing more stunned with each paragraph. Her father had been a scout for the army, in Mason's very unit. He had tried to prevent the raid that killed Mason's family, and when he couldn't, he had saved a woman and child, taking them to safety at a place called Valley of the Ancestors. "This is describing your wife and daughter," Maria said, her voice trembling. "Sarah and Hannah may still be alive." Mason felt like he'd been struck by lightning. "Impossible. I found their bodies at the outpost. I buried them. My father writes that he gave the woman his ring, silver with turquoise, to ensure safe passage if they encountered Apache." Mason's hand went to the chain around his neck, pulling out a silver ring inlaid with turquoise. "I found this on the finger of the dead woman. I thought it was Sarah's, damaged in the fire." "Then you identified the wrong bodies," Maria said gently. "And this map," she pointed to the deer hide, "will lead us to the valley, to your family." Mason stared at the map, then at the ring he'd carried for 8 years. Could it be true? Had he been hunting revenge when his family lived? The thought was almost too painful to bear. Years lost, a life of violence chosen when another path might have existed. "For 8 years, he said quietly, "I've lived with their ghosts, hunted down men, killed them, thinking I was avenging Sarah and Hannah." He closed his fist around the ring. "If they're alive, what kind of man does that make me?" "A man who thought he lost everything," Maria answered simply, "just as I did yesterday." Mason took a deep breath. "We need to leave. Caldwell will be back with that warrant, and Riker with more men. We'll head for this valley, see if there's truth to this story." They worked quickly, preparing horses and supplies. Mason hid the gold in a secret place only he knew, then gathered weapons, his Winchester, 2 Colt revolvers, and a Bowie knife. By the time the sun cleared the mountains, they were miles away, following game trails only a scout would know. They rode hard through the morning, pushing into the foothills where the desert gave way to scrub pine and rocky outcroppings. Mason set a grueling pace, but Maria kept up without complaint despite her injury. Around midday, Mason halted on a ridge, studying their back trail through a brass spyglass. In the distance, dust clouds rose, riders following their path. "Caldwell?" Maria asked. "Him and 6 others, Riker's with them. How did they find us so quickly?" Mason collapsed the spyglass. "Caldwell's no fool. He would have had men watching the ranch, and he's a good tracker." They'd ridden half a day when Mason spotted them 2 Apache braves watching from a ridge. Not hostile, just observant. "They're scouts," Maria whispered. "From my mother's clan." Mason nodded to them, a gesture of respect rather than threat. After a moment, they returned the nod before melting back into the rocks. "That's a good sign," Maria said. "They could have shot us from there." "Or worse, alerted Caldwell to our position," Mason replied. "What do we do now?" Mason studied the terrain ahead. "We make for Devil's Backbone, that ridge of rocks. The passage is narrow. If they follow, we can set a trap." They pushed on, the terrain growing more rugged. By late afternoon, they reached the narrow passage, a split in the rocky ridge barely wide enough for a horse to pass single file. Mason dismounted, unpacking dynamite from his saddlebags. "Mining charges," he explained, seeing Maria's expression. "Never know when you might need to move some earth." He set the charges at strategic points along the passage, rigging a simple trigger mechanism. "I don't like killing men," he said, working quickly. "But sometimes men don't give you much choice." When Caldwell's posse entered the narrow passage, Mason triggered the explosion. Rock and dirt erupted, sending a cascade of debris down the cliff face. The narrow path was instantly blocked by tons of stone. Through the dust cloud, they heard shouts and the whinnying of frightened horses. How many were buried? How many survived? Mason couldn't tell. "That'll slow 'em down," he said grimly. "We've bought ourselves some time." They rode on, following the map deeper into Apache territory. As night fell, they made camp in a sheltered canyon, building only a small fire that couldn't be seen from a distance. Over a meager meal of jerky and hardtack, Maria studied Mason's face in the firelight. "You're a hard man to understand, Reed. You help an Apache woman when most would have turned me away, yet you've killed Apache before." "I've killed all kinds of men," Mason replied. "Some deserved it, some didn't. I never took pleasure in any of it. Yet you hunted down the men who raided the outpost. That was different. They took everything from me." He paused. "At least, I thought they had. And if Sarah and Hannah are alive, what then?" Mason stared into the flames. "Then I've been living for the wrong reasons for 8 years, chasing ghosts when I should have been searching for them." They reached the area marked on the map by mid-morning the next day. The landscape had changed, the barren rocks giving way to more vegetation as they followed a narrow stream upward. "The map says the entrance is hidden behind a stand of junipers," Maria said, tracing the symbols with her finger. As they rounded a bend, a dozen Apache warriors materialized from the rocks, rifles and bows trained on them. Their leader, a tall man with gray-streaked hair, stepped forward. "Halt," he commanded in English. "You enter sacred ground." Maria replied in Apache, explaining who she was. The leader's stern expression softened slightly. "Daughter of one who walks with the wind," he said in English. "I am Great Eagle. Your father spoke of you." "My father spoke with you?" Maria asked, surprised. "2 seasons passed. He went seeking you, but did not return." Great Eagle turned to Mason. "And you, Mason Reed, Shadow Hunter, we know your name." "I've come looking for my wife and daughter," Mason said directly, "if they're still alive." Great Eagle nodded slowly. "They live in the valley. One who walks with the wind saved them, and they became part of our people." He gestured behind him. "But first, we must deal with those who follow you." "Caldwell survived the rock slide," Mason concluded. 3 men died, Great Eagle confirmed. 5 still come, with anger in their hearts and weapons in their hands. "They want the valley's secrets," Maria explained, "and gold." Great Eagle's expression hardened. "Many have sought our valley for wrong reasons. None have succeeded." He turned to his warriors, issuing commands in Apache. "We will prepare. You will rest and meet your family, Mason Reed. Then we will face these men together." The Valley of the Ancestors was hidden between towering cliffs, accessible only through a winding path so narrow and well-concealed that Mason, for all his scouting experience, would never have found it without a guide. When they emerged from the passage, Mason stopped in awe. Before them spread a hidden paradise, a valley of green grass and trees, watered by clear springs bubbling from the rock. A village of traditional wickiups mixed with more permanent wooden structures nestled beside a small lake. "Our sanctuary," Great Eagle explained, "hidden from those who would destroy it." As they approached the village, people emerged from dwellings, Apache mostly, but also faces of various backgrounds, all living together in apparent harmony. In the center of the village, a woman was teaching children from books. Her auburn hair was streaked with gray, but her face, Mason would have known it anywhere. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice failing. She looked up, the book dropping from her hands. "Mason?" she breathed, disbelief etched on her face. "It can't be." Beside her, a teenage girl stood, 15 years old now, no longer the 7-year-old child he remembered, but unmistakably Hannah, his daughter. As Sarah ran toward him, time seemed to slow. Mason saw her as she had been 8 years ago, holding little Hannah's hand at the door of their cabin, waving goodbye as he rode off on patrol. "Come back safe," she'd called. Those had been her last words to him until now. They ran to each other, colliding in an embrace so fierce it nearly knocked Mason off his feet. Tears flowed freely down his weathered cheeks as he held his family, the family he had thought dead for 8 long years. "We thought you were killed in the raid," Sarah sobbed. "Carlos said he saw you fall, shot by raiders." "I was wounded, but I survived," Mason explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I went back to the outpost, found bodies. I thought they were you." "Carlos saved us," Hannah said, her voice so much older than he remembered. "He brought us here when nowhere else was safe." The joyful reunion was interrupted by a warning horn from the valley entrance. Caldwell had found them. Mason reluctantly pulled away from his family. "Stay here," he told them. "I have unfinished business." At the valley entrance, Caldwell, Riker, and 3 men stood with weapons drawn. Behind them, Great Eagle and his warriors had positioned themselves on the rocks above. "That's far enough, Caldwell," Mason called out, walking forward with his rifle ready. Caldwell's cold eyes took in the scene, the hidden valley, the village visible in the distance. "So it's real," he said, almost to himself. "The Valley of Healing Plants." "You knew about this place," Mason accused. "That's what this is really about, not gold." "The gold's just a bonus," Caldwell admitted. "It's the plants that grow here, worth 10 times their weight in gold to the right buyers. Medicines that can cure diseases white doctors can't touch." "So you killed Miller when he found this place," Maria said, joining Mason. "And you've been searching for it for years." "Miller was going to tell everyone," Riker spat. "Fool thought these plants should be shared with the world." "They should be," came a new voice from above them. A man stepped out from behind a rock, an older Apache man with a striking resemblance to Maria. In his hands, he held a rifle aimed at Caldwell. "Father!" Maria cried. Carlos Diaz nodded to his daughter but kept his eyes on Caldwell. "I've been tracking you for years, Sheriff. Ever since I learned you ordered the raid on Mason's outpost to drive the Apache from these lands." Caldwell's face twisted with rage. "You have no proof." "I have this." Carlos pulled a folded paper from his shirt. "Your orders to Captain Richmond, the ones that never made it into official records, the ones that specifically called for elimination of all witnesses." One of Caldwell's men stepped forward, removing his hat. "That's enough evidence for me." He drew a badge from his pocket, different from a sheriff's star. "Thomas Reynolds, Federal Marshal." "Sheriff Caldwell, you're under arrest for corruption, murder, and conspiracy against the United States government." Caldwell's hand moved for his gun, but Mason was faster. A single shot rang out, the bullet striking Caldwell's shooting arm. The sheriff crumpled to his knees, clutching his wounded limb. "It's over, Caldwell," Mason said quietly. "No more killing." 6 months later, Mason sat on the porch of his ranch house, cleaning his Colt revolver by the light of the setting Sunday. The ranch had changed, expanded with new buildings, including a smaller cabin where Maria and Carlos now lived. Sarah came to sit beside him, watching as he worked the cloth over the gun's barrel. "Remember what you used to say?" she asked. "That every bullet has someone's name on it?" Mason nodded. "And the last one's for yourself." "You've fired all the bullets with names," Sarah said softly. "But that last one, the one meant for you, it's still in the chamber, isn't it?" Mason looked at the gun, then out at the field where Hannah and Maria were planting some of the valley's medicinal herbs. "Maybe it's time to take it out," he said. "Maybe it's time to let the past rest." He removed the final bullet from the gun, the bullet he'd carried for 13 years, since the day he thought he'd lost everything. He tossed it into the fire pit. Mason placed his Colt on the wall rack for the first time in 13 years. The gun that had been his constant companion, his tool of vengeance, now hung silent, a relic of a past he was finally ready to leave behind. "Some things are worth more than gold, worth more than blood," he said, putting his arm around Sarah. "Took me long enough to remember that." As the sun set over the Arizona Territory, a rider appeared on the horizon, Marshall Reynolds with news and, perhaps, a new mission for Mason Reed, the man who had found his soul again.